yourself in
I
the
know,
loop.
I know. I just didn't go.
Excellent. Well, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, a warm welcome to this, our 2022 IFST Lecture here in London. And a special welcome to Tim McLaughlin, who is going to be taking over from me as Chief Executive from tomorrow morning. I know. Tim will say a few words after the lecture, but it's for me to introduce the lecture in the first place. So welcome to all of those, particularly those that are joining live from our regional satellite events. The events this year are being held at Wales branch. This is a new branch which has only been set up this year. So welcome to Wales branch, who are meeting at Cardiff Metropolitan University, to Midlands branch, who are meeting at the University of Birmingham School of Chemical Engineering, and to Eastern branch, who are meeting at the Quadram Institute in Norwich. Some of you, not here, but some will be watching this after tonight, as we're going to be recording the event, and that will be shown as what has become fondly known as a watch-along event, and as a virtual event. So if you're watching this as part of that, a belated welcome to you as well. The IFST Lecture, for those of you, and I can see from the audience there's quite a number of you who've been to many lectures before, it is slightly different to our other events, because whereas normally we're solid on the science and solid on the technology, when it comes to the lecture, we take a step back, if you like, to be able to think a bit more strategically about issues around food science and nutrition. And tonight is going to be no exception. Before I introduce our guest speaker, I want to use this opportunity to say a few words about IFST and what we've been up to. It's been a very busy period for us, and I'm not just talking about the fact that there's been the handover of both myself and the operations director as Andrew steps down as well, but we've been involved in quite a number of impactful activities this year, and I just want to sort of highlight a few which I'm really proud of where we are with these. Firstly, we're developing and piloting an approved training provider scheme, and this is really to try and assure the standard of food science and technology training within the food sector. We have signed up with STEM Learning, and if tonight is going to a wide audience of people who could be potentially STEM ambassadors, please do sign up, because it's really important that we promote food science and technology out to the young talent of the future. EDI is equality, diversity and inclusion, and is a really important development for us. Most responsible organisations are paying a great deal of attention to that, and it's really important that we take steps in order to move the Institute forward in that way. Last year we put out a survey, and just a reminder, we'll be doing again this year, and please participate in that. We have Project Inspire, which takes our Love Food, Love Science website. Many of you will know that that's been around for quite a number of years and attracts a huge amount of young talent, young people in schools, the early stages of thinking about their careers. And that is what we're trying to do with that, is to develop it into a one-stop portal where all food sector organisations can be found. So, because we know the food sector is quite disparate. And this is a way of bringing that all together so that young people, again, can find the excitement of what's going on in the food sector. We launched this year a guide, and I'm sure there'll be many more of those, the Food Safety Governance for Directors Guide, which is a really important document, and thanks to all those that have put that together. We have the growth now of a number of hubs. We started off with a COVID hub, actually, which was providing a single place where people could find out the true science as we know it, or as it was developing around issues as it related to the food sector. But since then, we've now developed a series of these hubs, and the latest one is on allergens, which will be launched shortly. We now also have 13 food science fact sheets, which Helen, our president, will be very pleased about, because those started actually when she was chair of communications, and it was really important to us that we actually started to have a voice with those consumers who were getting a bit confused about all the messages and what does it really mean when we have the various labels that we have. How can they, if we're around as a trusted source for them, then this provides trusted resources free of charge for people to get the truth in this post-truth world. And our connectivity with governments is continuing, and we thank them for the cooperation and involvement. We have monthly dialogues with government departments, which I think are really, really useful in terms of them understanding our challenges and us understanding theirs. So none of that is possible without two groups of people. One is the amazing team that I have working for me, and I thank my executive team for a superb performance again this year. But of course, it couldn't happen either without the tremendous support of a huge number of very dedicated member volunteers, and many of them are looking at me now. So if you are one of those, then a big thank you for all that you do for the Institute. While I'm on the thanks, I will just say a thank you to our corporate supporters who continue to support us both financially and in other ways. They are Camden BRI, IFST, M&S, Nutraceuticals, and this year joined by Vican as well. So thank you for your support, which helps us to do what we do. And for our sponsors for tonight, which is Brenntag. That's all the thank yous, and at that point I'm now going to introduce you to Professor Tim Spector. I'm delighted that Tim has agreed to be our speaker tonight, and just a few words which are probably, you can read them in your program as well anyway, but Tim is Professor of Genetic Epidemiology at King's College London and a co-founder of Zoe, the world's largest nutrition study. He is the lead researcher behind the world's biggest citizen science health project. And citizen science for us as an institute, we think, is a really important way of engaging people in food and food science. Obviously awarded for an OBE for his work on the Zoe COVID study. Author of 4 science books, including The Diet Myth and the most recent one, Spoon-Fed. I know from the early conversation I had with Tim that tonight will be both thought-provoking and I'm sure with a smattering of controversy as well. And that's got to be a good thing because we want a healthy and lively Q&A afterwards. So at that point, can I thank you and pass over to Tim.
Thanks very much. I hope you can hear me. At the back, is that all right? Many thanks for inviting me. It is a privilege to come here and not talk about COVID and not be stuck in front of my Zoom screen. I'm going to just give a really rough overview of my thoughts about personalised nutrition, and hopefully we get lots of interesting discussion afterwards. Disclaimer, so yes, I wear multiple hats. So I work at King's College just over the road here, St Thomas's Hospital. I founded this company Zoe with 2 co-founders 5.5 years ago. It's into personalised nutrition, and I'm blogging my books shamelessly. And the one I think you'll really enjoy is the one that, if we were 2 weeks later, I could have brought it with me. It's coming out at the end of the month, Food for Life, which is a more practical guide, a sort of A to Z of foods, which I'm sure you'll be able to pick apart ruthlessly. I spent 6 years of my life writing that. But I want to go back in time now to where this all started, which is about 10 or 11 years ago when I got sick after trekking in a mountain, got some double vision, and my blood pressure suddenly went up, and I had this mild occlusion in the optic nerve, And suddenly I started behaving like one of my patients. I'm trained in medicine, as a rheumatologist, and have been seeing patients most of my life. So it was rather odd to be on the other end of it. And despite me having written hundreds of papers on obesity, genetics, and metabolic disorder, sorry? Move it up. Is there a pill light working? From the inside, there is a switch on off. So I know what I'll do. I'll use the other one, shall I? Oh, it's gone. As you can hear me, sorry. Those ones, yeah. Is that better? Okay, sorry about that. So that was me. I've transferred from doctor to patient, and I wanted to work out, how do I get my blood pressure down? How do I stop having another cardiac event? My father had died aged 57. And so I started looking around and thought it'd be fairly simple to work out what to eat and do. And these were the sort of things I saw basically on the NHS websites. It was all about counting calories, remembering that all calories are equal, still being told to avoid high-fat foods and saturated fats. Eat starchy foods was still the mantra. Never skip a meal, which is still there on the NHS website, particularly breakfast. Eat little and often, graze like a cow, and that exercise is a really good way to lose weight. Now, and ultimately, there's one diet that fits everybody. We have 2,000 calories for women and 2,500 for men. It's very simple, and it's all complete nonsense. And there's no evidence base at all for that. So, during this time, things have really evolved rapidly. And I think we are seeing a real change in opinion in the opinion leaders here that isn't reflected in the slow-moving government guidelines, etc. And we took, as an example, 13 professors of nutrition in the US and the UK and asked them to rank 105 foods. Most of them agreed that at the extremes, that eating large bowls on their own of white rice or biscuits or Kentucky Fried Chicken was not particularly healthy. And on the other end, lots of olive oil, berries, and interestingly, coffee was unanimously seen as healthy. But in the middle, if you look, there was no real agreement on whether dried fruits were good for you, yogurts, dairy products, cheese, fermented dairy products, juices, orange juice, and particularly no agreement on whether diet drinks were healthy or unhealthy, and quite big disagreements. So I think this is telling us that we're missing something here, and we need to focus on these bits which we're unsure of, and it needs a different approach. So what struck me was that in the 10 years before, I gained about 10 kilograms, and I realized when I started putting glucose monitors on myself what was happening. And my hospital, working in a hospital, I used to go there and I was told I had to have my breakfast, so I'd have my muesli, a bit of orange juice, maybe the odd croissant at weekends, and then at lunchtime I'd be having my brown bread, sweet corn, tuna sandwich, which looked healthy and appetizing. And later found that when I started testing my blood sugar, I was getting these really large peaks, having this fairly high carbohydrate breakfast and lunch. Although it wasn't large quantities, it was causing me these big peaks. I would get hungry and I'd drop my energy levels. And we've shown that there is this link now between these sugar peaks and various metabolic disorders and inflammation, etc. And that really is how we sort of got into this idea of individuals having very different potential responses. And at the same time, the first trial, it's not the first time, this is only 3 years ago, the first trial of an RCT of ultra-processed foods where identical macronutrients and calories were given to volunteers, where one was heavily processed and the other was whole foods. And main difference between the two groups was that the ultra-processed food, people overate by about 200 calories per day. And they found it equally appetizing, but there was something about that food that just made them overeat. So clearly, things that you couldn't explain just with the calories, you couldn't explain just with the macronutrients, which sort of breaks the mold of where, what the old ways of thinking about nutrition. And I think all of this together suddenly shows with this new science about measuring things like glucose peaks and dips, this difference between the way the processing and the structure of food is having a different effect on the body is really just part of this whole idea that we're moving from a very reductionist idea of nutrition, from calories, macronutrients, to this incredibly complex model where we have microbes, where we have our microbiome full of trillions of basically pharmacies. Each microbe is able to produce all kinds of chemicals, depending on if it's fed right, that are key for our body. Hundreds of times more genes than we have in our own body. These microbes are really part of us and we've been ignoring it. We didn't know about it because we didn't have the technology until now. These are interacting in metabolites in our blood, and these are interacting with the food itself, which, as you know better than I do, is made up of at least 30,000 different chemicals, which traditional nutrition research is still talking about as if there's only 3 groups, which is complete nonsense. So suddenly, what perceived by medicine as the most boring subject in the world, nutrition, and you're only allowed 3 hours as a medical student to discuss it, has become, I think, one of the most exciting areas of medical science. And a lot of it is due to the technology that's changed it, the ability to sequence our microbiome in incredible detail to reveal not only the microbes, the bacteria that we know about, but the archaea, and the fact that there are 5 times as many viral phages eating specifically these bacteria, which could be a new form of therapy. Instead of antibiotics, we can target actually viruses to eat the bacteria we don't want in us. We've got fungi as well, incredibly important. And also, as we'll discuss later, parasites are in all of us. And in the old days, we just wanted to get rid of them with the most strongest antibiotics possible. Now, we're not so sure. This all came about, I was giving a talk such as this about 6 years ago when a couple of entrepreneurs in the audience accosted me afterwards and said, we'd love to do some work with you. Let's explore getting a company together, combining this concept of glucose meters and personalized responses to food with the microbiome. And I thought they were crazy, never see them again, because I said, it's got to do it on science. Most companies like this are based all on marketing, and that's where all the money goes. And you just have a glossy brochure and website and a few smiling doctors in white coats, and away you go. But amazingly, they got the right investors and the money to spend several years doing research without any product. And that was very lucky. But it happened to come just at the right time, because these continuous glucose monitors, which you've seen, I don't have on one now, but I've often got one, have become sort of semi-routine now. You can buy them on Amazon, but you wouldn't know how to use it. But these work for 2 weeks and give you a blood readout of your blood sugar for every 5 minutes. And they're really accurate for the levels we're using it. Finger prick testing now, you can test 100 metabolites with 1 drop of blood and get really, really good measures of things like triglycerides in real time done at home. You've got an app that you can log all your foods, you can take pictures of your foods, and gives you in real time what's happening on your glucose monitor, and you can look at your food scores. And of course, we're now doing metagenome shotgun sequencing that
10 years ago would cost you £5,000 a sample, and we can do it for somewhere around £100 a sample. So these technologies have all come together at once, with also the feeling that the public want something more, that they know there's something wrong with their diets, with the food. They don't trust a lot of the advice they've been given. And so all these things have come together just, I think, at the right time. So that led us to do these studies, and the Zoe Predict studies, which the first one we did was in 1,000 people, mainly with twins, and we've done others, other subsets where we gave, individual meals to the same people. Everyone had the same spaghetti bolognese from Tesco's at exactly the same time, and we looked at those responses. But essentially, these are all the same model. So we've now done about 40,000 people, giving them all identical meals at the same time, looking at their responses, and testing their microbiomes in great detail. So we have this huge database now of foods. They do a food frequency questionnaire as well as logging their foods, and we're seeing their responses to these foods in real time. So the data itself is pretty amazing, and you've probably seen this before, and it's published. We published this in one of the top journals, Nature Medicine, and essentially the take-home was that we did this at St. Thomas's Hospital over the road and Mass General in the US in great detail, but we then transferred that so it could be done at home. So it was basically the same test, but that's why we could expand it. You couldn't see 40,000 people at St. Thomas's Hospital very easily. But if people are doing it themselves and they're paying for it, then suddenly you see how this model works. But the first aha moment was the fact that we had at least a 10-fold difference in the response of normal people to an identical muffin, both in triglycerides and glucose and in insulin. So that really was the key. If we get that different response in these standardized conditions, that allows personalized predictions to occur. If you didn't have that variation, you'd be stuck. So that's what we did, and the concept of these peaks being bad, I've told you there's some epidemiology behind these people who have these peaks, who have genes that are linked to particular peaks. They've done those, and those people tend to be more obese, tend to have more diabetes, tend to have more heart disease. But what we also showed is that we could show that inflammatory markers are increased in people who have these peaks, both the sugar peak and the fat peak. So it does make sense that if you're having these continuously, you go a build-up of long-term, low-level inflammation that over time causes metabolic problems that we see. And if you can reduce this, like the fireman in this slide, you can suppress those peaks, you can put out the fire, then you're going to be in a much healthier state. And it's also quite a lot of increasing evidence that these inflammation can also do things on your mood, like make you hungry or make you tired. We didn't really appreciate that when we started. And of course, a lot of you probably know about genetic testing. I spent most of my career doing genetics, a big fan of genetic determinism. My twin studies have shown virtually everything is to some extent genetic. I expected these responses to be highly heritable, and I was wrong. The glucose response is only 30% heritable in a twin model, and probably less when you look in families. And the response to fats is less than about 3%. So these are really important because there are many companies selling genetic testing for prediction of food responses. And I think apart from a few selected examples like lactose intolerance, alcohol, and caffeine, they are useless. And this is wearing my genetics hat. So I've had to sort of eat my words because I said, we have to do this first study with 600 twins to really show the genetics. And we were going to then add in a genetic component to the test to then really sort of make it really good. And it turns out we didn't need to. Genetics is, in this case, not useful, whereas in the fasting state, it is quite useful. But as soon as you get into the dynamic state, which hasn't been tested before, then it sort of disappears. and I found also this link between food and mood. Personally, people were reporting it, but one day we were doing some studies to see whether the old idea of eating your carbs in the morning was always good compared to the evening, and for young people that was true, but oldies like me it wasn't true, and this is my trace. But we had to, all I ate for 24 hours was muffins, and I can tell you that I never felt more sick in my life. Not necessarily because of the muffins, I thought they were fine. I was allowed to have it with black coffee. But these big spikes and dips really, really upset me. I couldn't concentrate, and I'd never felt anything like that before. And so I, again, changed my mind about, I just thought, oh, well, people are just a bit sensitive, aren't they? But the mood, it's all psychological nonsense. And to go further on this idea of these dips, I think is really interesting, because we have a lot of physicists in the group who are doing astrophysics, and they changed to nutrition, which is quite interesting. It's far more interesting for them now to actually something practical they can do, because otherwise just identifying another star doesn't really help. But these are really bright guys, and they just said, well, let's forget what the literature says. Let's look at all these traces and see what we can find. And they found that 3 hours after a carbohydrate meal, normally when you look for 2 hours after any of these glucose traces, look at 3 hours, you see these very strong dips in some people, in about 1 in 4 people. And they said it was quite marked, and nearly everyone dips at some point below their baseline, but these were really marked ones. And there was a strong correlation between those and people reporting tiredness, hunger, and overeating by about 300 calories that day. So we had this personalized effect. Everyone, again, is having identical meals, identical muffins. And these people, unknown, they were blinded to their sugar results, were reporting this. So again, this tells us two things. One, there is this personalized response that isn't just the traditional peak, it's the dip. And you get these personalized differences in hunger levels, energy levels, and overeating, which under the old all calories are equal model shouldn't occur, because everyone was having the identical muffin, but one person would get a dip, and that wouldn't cause that would cause overeating. The other person wouldn't. Do you see what I mean? So that we've got, I think that was a really key experiment. And of course, I won't go into detail on this, but we had, when we got to 1,000 people, this was the biggest study ever done on linking food, microbes, and health outcomes. And this gave us totally new insights using this shotgun analysis, and allowed us to identify for the first time this group of good and bad bugs that were associated with what we call healthy diets, but also healthy outcomes. And we had to pick ones that were consistent in all the groups, because everybody has a very unique gut microbiome. Okay, so no two people are the same, which is part of the problem of this kind of research. You do need big numbers if you're dealing with this level of individuality. But we found these consistent good and bad bugs as microbiome signatures of health that were related to food. So based on that, we could start to target these, building up the good ones and reducing the bad ones via food therapy, whether it's prebiotics or just telling people to eat more broccoli. And this is very much, we've got 30 times the sample size now, 40 times, and so we're getting even more detail. And I think the idea is that this ratio of good to bad bugs could well be the model for the future about how we look at food. And just to give you an idea of how fast this is moving, I mentioned parasites. In the latest meta-analysis, which, as they keep updating it every year, tells us that there's this parasite in about a quarter of the UK, a quarter of this room have this parasite blastocystis. And a few years ago, your GP would have sent you to somewhere and you've had it eradicated. You couldn't possibly go with this thing that has been related to tropical travelers' diarrhea, etc. But it turns out that if you do have it, you're at a super healthy group. You're thinner, you've got lower blood pressure, you've got lower lipid levels, all your heart risk is way down. And it seems to, as you can see from this chart, in the US, it's less than 5% of people have it, and yet all our ancestors had it. So we're not quite sure whether it's which way around the causality goes, and we don't know how I've got it, but I don't know how to give it to you guys, and whether it will stick in you or not if I did throw it around anyway. But just gives you an idea if you could find foods that could target these particular microbes, it would be very interesting indeed, and get us back to our ancestral microbiome, which we know was at least double the diversity it is today. So what we did is it's nice to do research, and that's what most of my career has been doing, writing lots of papers that no one reads. But it's nice to actually have something practical. And so this is why I really love what I'm doing now, is the science is being turned into something practical, which is the Zoe program, which allows us to do three things. So you get the test period where you get your blood sugar, your blood fats, and your microbiome tested. Then you get an app with your food scores. You make those food choices. And then you have a program with a digital nutritionist that talks you through this, so how you can each day get a good score that's personalized to you. So some people will have high fats in their diet, some people will have a greater amount of carbs, and it will vary on all kinds of different factors that we're still evolving and tweaking. But we think at the moment we estimate we're getting about 80% prediction from the muffin test about how you'll respond to any food. So the scores actually do the work, so people try and get a high score for their day, and you can take an unhealthy food like supermarket white bread. If you put enough avocados and nuts and seeds on it, you can get that score really good. So the idea is we're not trying to stop anyone eating any food, we're just trying to make sure that what you're eating in a day is actually healthy. I think this is really important. It's not a diet, we're not looking at calories at all, it's about informing people about food choices. So my results were pretty terrible. This was about 4 years ago. They've actually got better recently, which I'm proud of, but this is a reminder that I can't be complacent. So I had very bad sugar control, my fat wasn't particularly good either, but the only thing saving me was my gut microbes, so they were good. And I get a list of my scores there, you can see on the grains on the right, giving me a score out of 10 about which ones I should have. And you look here, and I've made a lot of swaps based on this. I used to eat a lot of bananas, but they're only scoring 25% for me, whereas if I had pears or apples, very easy to swap, I get over about 40. Changing my grains, very, very simple things to do. And I've completely changed my breakfast, my lunch. I no longer have healthy muesli and I no longer have plant milks either, interestingly, which spiked my blood sugar. So, it's constantly evolving. So I've changed in the last sort of couple of years, and I now have plenty of coffee and don't have as much tea as I used to, because I know coffee is good for me and my microbes. And I'm saved by my blastocystis, so I love my blastocystis. But what's really interesting is this new concept of thinking about food in a way that isn't about the macronutrients, it's not about the calories, it's about how these effects have on your own body and your own gut microbiome, allows us to get these scores. So these are mean Zoe scores for different dairy and fermented foods, and you can just give an idea that how in the future these sort of scores could be part of everyday labeling, because you have got an idea of a quantitative way of actually evaluating some of these foods that is more holistic than the current one and more useful. And the current one is completely misleading in my view about particularly overemphasizing calorie foods and fats. We're doing an RCT for the Zoe study because that's the proof of principle really against standard dietary advice, and we'll get those results early next year. But just anecdotally, I think the most important thing, as I said, is people who do 3 months of the program, getting their scores up, reducing their sugar peaks. The main thing they notice is actually having more energy and less hunger. And I think we're seeing small effects on weight, but nothing dramatic. And I think it's more about a sustainable plan than a rapid weight loss that we're now moving towards, realizing that's not the main game. Yeah. So I think we should ban calorie counting and reductionism. I think this is complete nonsense to have the main thing on a packet is what you look at is the calorie. It totally obscures the quality of the food, and we need to find ways to allow the consumer to see the quality of the food. I think all of us can improve our gut microbes even without personalization, just by following a few simple rules like 30 diverse plants a week, fermented foods, high polyphenol foods, and educating the public about polyphenols, which I think is something we could all do, and there's a huge expanding market here. And in my new book, I've got all kinds of tables about polyphenols, but how does the consumer actually pick a high polyphenol food? Well, you need to know the difference between iceberg lettuce with nothing in it and a Rosso Lolo Italian one with lots of purple leaves that has 2,000 times more polyphenols in it. The public, this is going to become mainstream. I think my personal view is we should reduce ultra-processed foods and artificial sweeteners, which we know have a very personalized effect on the gut microbiome. I didn't have time to show it, but we're talking about certain emulsifiers, not all of them, and certain sweeteners we have demonstrated have effects on the gut microbiome. And things like sucralose give me a sugar spike when I'm under experimental conditions, as does saccharin, but others don't. And we'll, in the future, be able to personalize that individual response to some of these ingredients that we are saying is safe for everybody. Safe for everybody, as long as you don't test it properly. And the future of food for me includes, working with apps. I think apps are the future. This is far too complicated for people to know everything that's going on. We're going to have to rely on trusted apps that go up and scan foods or take pictures of them. So you're basically working with a nutritionist in your pocket, and these should be as common as hailing an Uber. I think that relook at the labels, the idea of having some gut-friendly label, a ultra-processed label, and I think you might end up having a stratified personalization. Even if you can't afford everyone to get individual, we might be able to saying, well, for people who are women who are menopausal, who are of this particular age, these are the products that we are recommending, or a different level for different individuals. I think I can see how we can use this massive individual personalization to stratify into groups for people who can't afford it. So I think that there's lots there, and we can talk about the menopause as well, but we found that even if you adjust for age, just the effect of the menopause has a different effect on your blood sugar levels, your appetite, your weight gain. And so some of these things are really, really hitting where there's a lot of unmet need and problems. So I'll stop there. If people want to know more, I think Food for Life is the one to get. JoinZoe.com has all the information about personalizing and product. There's also a very good podcast called Zoe Science and Nutrition, which is getting about 250,000 downloads a week, which is very, very useful as scientific discussion. And I'm happy to take questions. Thank you.
Very much. Am I mic'd up? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. Oh, I can hear myself now. It's even spookier. That was really, really interesting. Thank you. A novel experience for me. I realised I've never sat at the front of a lecture theatre in the whole of my academic, or, well, my time at university is probably a better way of putting it. It is quite interesting. I do think getting the exercise of climbing to the back is probably where I was benefiting. So, first thing I'm going to say is, my instructions for John are, I've got to give a balance of questions from the audience here and those of us who are in Cardiff, the West Midlands, and in Norwich. You've got to come this way. Can I go that way? Oh, well, they're filming us, that's why. Hope you've got a wide angle. So the message is, if I'm going to get a balance, because I can see there's lots of people just about to throw their hands up, lots of nutritionalists in the audience champing at the bit, but if I don't start to get some questions to the region, we're going to be sitting here going, no, you can't answer your question yet. So please, 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 if you're in Wales, the West Midlands, or in Norwich, use the hashtag IFST Lecture, and Deborah will miraculously get them through to me. So you have to post on Twitter using hashtag IFST. Sorry? One more click. One more click. Oh. Right, good. So we'll start off from London. Questions, please. Put your hands up. Right, I'm going to do it in the order they appeared. So up there first, and then I've got you two logged, so that'll do for us. Get us started. Need a roving mic on, guys.
Got a loud voice. Thank you. That was a very, very interesting, fascinating talk. Thank you so much. How does your research affect the family and social eating? Because if everyone's got personalised nutrition, how are we going to keep the family together or the shopping list vaguely usable?
Great question, and it is one of the downsides to personalising nutrition. But what I think we're going to see is easy to do things like individualised breakfasts. I think that's fairly straightforward. You know, fats or carbs. That's more easy to control. The main family meal, I think, will see perhaps a compromise between the different health needs of different groups. But I think we'll be seeing common dishes with extra vegetables or nuts and seeds for other people. So I think envisaging not a completely different set of meals, but just one will have meat and the other will have vegetarian options. One, you'll have a side dish of kefir or other sauces and things, or kimchi for the others. But I think it'd be an interesting social experiment, but it could end up being actually the whole family gets a more diverse meal than they are currently, than the meat and two veg currently. So, the current family meal in the UK is so dreadful that I think adding any diversity to it, so that one member can get extra amounts of that veg or whatever, will be good. And if we just increased everyone's diversity and had more plants, we'd be doing a good thing anyway. But I think, I don't know the full answer to that, how it's going to play out.
Okay, thank you. The lady who had her hand up there. Yes.
Effects of alcohol on the gut microbiome? Yes, I have. And in general, it's negative, except for certain high polyphenol alcohols, such as red wine and potentially cider. So if
because natural cider, not the mass-produced one, but the more artisan one, has actually higher levels of polyphenols than red wine. And that's because they have obviously, there's still the fruit, the skin of the fruit is in both of those products. So I think increasingly we're going to see that. And the data, we did this in about 5,000 people, that those who were drinking 1 to 2 glasses of red wine had once you adjusted for all other factors across 3 countries, had a more diverse, healthier looking gut. So I think if you combine that with the epidemiology data showing that red wine does have cardiovascular benefits, I think it does all that up. Again, it's going to be all about the dose though. But unfortunately, my wife was very keen on finding something good about gin and tonic, but I couldn't find it.
More work needed.
More work, yes, but just bigger numbers, yeah.
Please.
Yeah, I'll shout that. My name is John O'Brien. I'm an IFST board member. Bravo for saying abandon reductionism. But I was taken by you citing the whole paper of the process, food paper. Because as food scientists, we're struggling with what that means exactly. And when I look at some of the definitions, kombucha, kimchi, etc., there is a myriad of different formulations of all those products. So when you say kombucha, it could be 100 different recipes or 100 different microbiomes in the product. I think what you have is powerful because of the numbers. And the whole paper was only 20 subjects. So it's a huge extrapolation from 20 to 20 million. But, you know, from 1,000 to 20 million, you've got a lot of power in the data. But the challenge, I think, is characterizing the materials. So I guess that's the question. How do you go about, fixing that gap in the database of what you're trying to do?
Well, there's nothing wrong with the whole data. It was small because it was a closed sort of experiment, and they had to eat within a laboratory canteen for 2 weeks, and everything had to be done in that way if you're matching 2 foods. You couldn't do that at home. You couldn't do that in 20,000 people in a properly matched design. So you've got to take those experiments, realize that it took them for 3 years to do it, and it cost millions of dollars. And then you've got to look at other evidence to say, does it back it up? And then you go to the epidemiology data, and you go to the Nutrinet Sante study and other ones which all got their flaws, but they're all pointing in the same direction. And
I believe that the caloric density to all groups is different, and it's probably a factor in driving the conclusion against the more processed diet that we eat.
well, I think there's lots of reasons for it, which we can discuss, and some of it is, it may be the more you process the food, the more accessible the nutrients are, the more fat and sugar you get absorbed into your body more quickly. You get higher sugar peaks, you get higher fat peaks. And so the more refined it is compared to the whole foods, you've got that physiological difference. I'm agreeing with that. But, pragmatically, in all the studies we're doing, whether you get dips because of it or you get extra hunger, it's all the same thing. It's worse for you than the less processed food for a number of different reasons. And some of it is, perhaps due to the genius of food scientists that make them irresistible. But some of it is due to the physical properties of the food itself, that it's so rapidly absorbed. And I think this is something in the future that people have got to come to terms with to see how they're going to do this. But the kombucha question is interesting. I think we're just starting this debate. 5 years, I gave this talk 5 years ago. Most people had not heard of kombucha and kefir. Okay, so the fact we're talking about it, and it's in every supermarket in London now, I think is an amazing thing. So we'll get there.
Is your question a follow-on, or right? I'm going to take chair's prerogative. I'm just a food technologist, right? I apply science, so it's great. I'm really thrilled by what you said. There's some stuff I'd really like to get behind, but I need you to help me. Define ultra-processed in a way that I can then go, there you are, that half of the audience are ultra-processed and that half of the audience aren't. Because the problem with the definition at the moment is it's not well defined, or somebody's yet to define it well for me. Can you help us? Or
well, we know the NOVA classification is highly flawed, but it is the first one that was really out there. Other more primitive ones are, which, I mean, I guess you guys know it better than I do, but it's that in the ultra-processed form, you're using extracts of whole foods put together rather than the original foods themselves. So it's like
But
extracts of
there's
extracts.
very little of that type of food in the mainstream marketplace today. There might have been, and the audience can shout me down, there might have been 40 years ago when I started, it was chemistry sets and there are people here who did it. But today, that whole move towards, almost like the whole food movement has hit the commercial food industry in the last 30 years. And so if you look at whole sectors of the industry, those things aren't there anymore. And this is why I struggle with the definition.
Well, I mean, yeah, we could devote an hour to discussing the, but I think what's going to do this is metabolomics and some of these new technologies, I think, are going to come to have a more quantitative way of actually assessing this. So actually saying which the harmful metabolites are produced, and then you then analyze all the foods and you can get some idea of quantification. I think that's coming. We're in this transition stage where there is uncertainty. Some people say if it's got more than 10 ingredients, if you've got ingredients you wouldn't find in your kitchen, be very aware. All these kind of halfway measures, which don't make it easy. But I think the industry also needs to stand up and say, listen, this is coming, guys. Why doesn't the industry start thinking about it?
I think Tim, that's what I'm saying. The industry has seen this coming for a long time and has cleaned up recipes hugely.
Well, they cleaned it up, but not in a way that people outside the industry see that as clean. They say it's natural. You've gone from synthetic products to naturally extracted products, and to give it clean labels. But to someone like myself, I see this as just a fudge, moving from one ingredient you didn't really need to another one. In order to, make stuff is still highly refined. It's still, piquing our sugar and our appetite and all these other things, and the system is very clever.
I'm not. I am an example of peaking sugars, but it's eating some of the things I do and why they peak, which intrigues me, and also because I understand the food industry quite well. It's trying to put the two together, and I don't think we've found the linkage well enough yet. And I think we need to find someone, and it leads on to your other point about we need new labelling, we need a new way of describing food. And until we've created a framework, we won't be able to do it.
No, I think it's absolutely right, because you need something to work towards, and you can't just, I think the old days of just adding a bit of fibre to some rubbish food, it doesn't work anymore. Because that was another thing that we thought would work 5 years ago, and all the trials of prebiotic fibre, so artificial fibre, didn't really work very well, and actually the gut microbiome got less diverse because you need a diverse set of real fibre rather than just using one.
Okay, I have got some questions from the regions, but I'm aware I've got two in the room. So that one up there first, please. Yes?
Because the satellites can't hear otherwise, so I'll just pass it down.
Thanks. Hannah Skeggs from IGD. We're very aware at the moment of health inequalities, especially between different demographic groups. And I was wondering, when you've got a study that people are paying to get their results from, so they've probably got some expendable income and they're also very interested in health, whether you're worried that you're actually going to end up with a not representative sample of people that you're looking at their diets and their microbiome.
Well, I think if you get to 1 million people, within that group, you will have enough people with a range of budgets and ethnicities to draw conclusions. It's never going to be totally representative of the UK population, and no diet study is. So none of the big epidemiological studies are ever representative. They just hopefully are big enough to contain some of those groups. But we are hoping to be able to work with, say, general practices to give out some free kits to people that wouldn't otherwise get them, and if anyone knows companies that want to, donate some kits to their local general practice, I think things like the diabetes nurses are very keen to try and get some of these really difficult patients, give them a different reason to be motivated to change their diets. So I think, but I think it'll all be solved with big numbers. I think with 1,000 people you can't sailing. Once we get to sort of 100,000, I think we can.
Yeah, I think it's, you're right, we'll get the science right with the big numbers. It's then how we apply it to the whole of society.
We're not going to change the whole of society overnight.
No.
You know, my view is it's a, you know, I won't say trickle down, which is the a trussism.
Should we
but,
take the next question? There's one up there, please.
Thank you. It was a very interesting lecture, thanks. I'm Solrani Elahi from LGC. Before the health food regulations, there was a huge number of claims on food labels for probiotics, but since the regulations came in, they all dropped off the cliff, and that's mainly because it was shown that a lot of the probiotics on the market didn't survive the human gut. So I was quite interested in this approach. It's fascinating, but how do we regulate this area? And given that we've had sort of decades of the traditional education system and it's not working, we're seeking to implement something that's quite new. I'm just interested in your thoughts there. Thanks.
Well, I think technology really is the answer to this, because the probiotics were falsely given that reputation because the techniques at the time to measure microbes weren't very good, and so they weren't sensitive enough to pick them up. So yes, quite a few microbes do die in the stomach and don't get through, but all the recent studies show clearly you can pick up probiotics. We've done studies ourselves showing that regular yogurt eaters have, you know, the yogurt microbes detectable in decent amounts. So I think that's old hat, and that's gone. So now everyone believes that probiotics do get to the lower gut. How much they work is somewhat debated. Meta-analysis show that on average they do work for most conditions in unhealthy people. They've not been shown in healthy people to prevent anything, but there are about 18 different conditions they've been shown to have some benefit. No one knows what make or what strain or what one to recommend, because all the manufacturers keep it patented and separate, and until we sort of break that down. But I'm very optimistic about the next generation of probiotics that have used not just some strain that was used in Bulgarian, farmers 100 years ago. These are actually targeted because they have a health benefit and then worked back. So I think its time will definitely come.
Okay. Well done, Quadrant and the Eastern Branch. You're leading the way now. Come on, Midlands and Wales. So from the Eastern Branch, there's a concern about so the concern is, will personalised nutrition increase the incidence of eating disorder? And how do you try and make sure that doesn't happen? So do you believe in the premise, the first bit, and what can we do about it?
I think if you're not careful, it's a risk. But I think we're in more of a risk now with these exclusion diets and these, the publicity around intolerance and allergy, and most of the diets on the market are cutting out foods. So I believe personalised nutrition is going to enlarge what people can eat, and our philosophy at Zoe is that there's nothing you can't eat. So it's about inclusion of all foods. So I think as long as you take that approach and you don't go down this line, you must never have this, you must never have that, that's where you get the anxiety problems. And so I think we have to be very careful. But I think it's a problem in this whole field. But at the moment, it couldn't be worse, really, with the gluten-free diet, the lectin-free diet, the
latest Instagram
the latest
diet.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Question about how consistent are the responses to foods in individuals? Do they vary? Are there other factors which you don't think you've identified yet, or are they fairly consistent?
Well, there's multiple factors that affect your food, and that's what we realized in this study. So it's incredibly complex. So what we didn't realize is what happened the day before influences your very much on that day. So what you ate, even the last 24 hours, whether you had a high-fat meal or low fiber or whatever, has to be controlled for. Also, how long you slept for, what time you got up. These all are significant factors on your morning sugar response to that muffin. and as well as exercise and your age and season, all these things. But if you do adjust for those, we do get reproducible results. But previously, people hadn't thought of all these other factors. Mm-hmm. But once you do realize that it's all linked together, it's very holistic, really. Exercise, sleep, your mood, it all determines, it's all linked together with these peaks and these responses. So it's very much part of our evolution to have this.
I think it's entirely. It strikes a chord, and there's nothing in me which says no, that's alien. But I suppose the challenge some of us are seeking is we have enough trouble trying to convince people with the flawed dietary advice to make it a dietary advice as opposed to a meal by meal, food by food advice. And then you've got to put all these lifestyle factors together to get the same response. It's a challenge, isn't it? And apps is probably about the only way that we'll do it.
Yeah, apps and big numbers. And I think, it's about knowing that if you're assessing how you're going to respond to food, you've got another 100,000 people's results to also, fall back on. And I think that it's the scale. You've got to remember the average nutrition study is about 20 people. And we've based everything we know about nutrition on this idea that, how exercise affects it, how breakfast is crucial. It's all done on 20 people, usually nutrition students, no older than 23. It's crazy, really, when you look at the old data, what we accepted. So we've got to move to this new model now where nutrition becomes like genetics or astrophysics, where, the numbers are the thing that beats the complexity.
Okay, I'm just drawing breath for a minute because I can't believe the nutritionist's going to let you get away with that. But it appears you've convinced them.
Well, you've only got to look at the literature and see. But nutrition research, I'm bashing it, but it's horribly underfunded. It's a new science, only came really after the Second World War. It was founded basically on malnutrition, and all the principles were there. It was kicked off with vitamins, and so since it's switched from malnutrition to overnutrition, there hasn't been the backing. The government hasn't put money in. Each nutrition department doesn't have that prestige in universities that the other historical departments do, and a lot of the stuff that goes on in food companies is secret and isn't often published, and so it's a problem. But I think this is why these new technologies and the internet and citizen science and things like this can really build on it.
Mm-hmm. Oh, right, yes, we've stirred. So they're first, and then we'll go here, and then Helen, okay? Just while they get the microphone, we'll have a quick session on nutritional labelling and ingredients lists, because once you know how to read behind them, there's not much hidden in the food industry, trust me.
No, I've discovered it's learning a new language, isn't it, really? Yeah. That's all it's all about. It's like, yeah.
Yeah, it's a language.
Sorry, you mentioned different diets and different stages of life. Have you looked at doing like this similar study for the same people, like in their 20s, 40s, 50s, and do you have a recommendation for when people's diet will change or whether they should eat changes in their life stages?
Well, we're just doing this now. You've got to remember how new the data is we've got. We're currently we're testing 1,000 people a week in the UK, and in real time. But we started just with 1,000. So I mentioned we've just looked at perimenopausal women between 45 and 55 and found huge differences. So we're talking 50% difference in glycemic response depending on the state of the hormones, and that can be reversed by HRT. So that's a pretty good example of how circumstance can change, and a woman in her 40s can be happily eating croissants and donuts and after going to the gym, and then suddenly hormones start to change and gains 5 kilos very rapidly and doesn't know why. Hasn't changed anything else, and suddenly it's the body that's changed. We're looking at the rate at people age, does vary, and there's a drop-off point in the microbiome as well that does change with age as well. That's another factor that's important. So I think only when you get this big data can you start to stratify. But the next phase of our scoring is going to put people into 5-year bands and say that, because I think the advice we give a 20-year-old on a score is going to be very different to what we give a 60-year-old. And I think that's what hasn't been there at the moment. I think, it's fine if kids want to have, bits of sugar, much more sugar at 20 than you do at 60. I don't think we should be as strict about it. But I think that's where we're coming to. So this stratified knowledge, which I think, as I said, will move over into the general advice, even for people who aren't testing themselves.
Tim, we're waking the audience up, but we've not got a lot of time left.
Okay.
So we're going to have to move to Radio 4 type answers.
Quick,
It's the
yes
John
or no
Humphrey,
answer.
45 seconds. No, you've got 45 seconds to explain the point.
Okay.
There's a question there.
Helen Ferrier. Oh, I don't think is that on? I'm Helen Ferrier from the National Farmers Union. And you mentioned more funding for nutrition research, but do you have any other, or what is your top ask of policymakers to try and make some of this happen? Or is it really up to the food industry and kind of private sector organisations to make the changes?
Well, we had the National Food Report, the Dimbleby Report, a lot of good stuff in there, which the government are going to ignore. So, the policy is not my strong point. I'm very, very pessimistic about the government leading this. I would love to see the food industry start to say, you know what, all we need is a few rules, and if we, the top 10 companies can, dominate the market, and they could decide they want to do things, we want to relabel. I just think giving people choice, just a simple labeling food on some aspect of healthiness of it, that has nothing to do with fats and carbohydrates, and this current obsession with was it HFS? No, the new
HFSS.
Yeah. Anyway,
yeah.
It's so retro, unbelievable. So getting a gut-friendly score. We are talking to a number of.
Right, I'm going to do my John Humphrey.
45 seconds.
Let's do 45 seconds. Next question,
Shouldn't
please.
talk about policy, so it's very hard.
Not yet.
Shout.
I'll shout loud. Oh, hello. Tom Holland's Rainer Foods. Really interesting talk, thank you. A concern that I have, and I'm sure many people have here, personalised diets. How sustainable are these looking into the future? I would assume very quickly, plant-based good, ultra-processed, usually of ultra-processed, depending on definition, higher CO2e. So it feels like it could be something, but the very large variation of potential foods to a particular person could start generating significant quantities of waste. Have you considered that?
It's the next thing we're considering. So we're going to start scoring all the foods by their environmental impact. So to give consumers the choice of picking difference between a Mexican avocado or a Spanish avocado, for example, or doing this. But I think
Natasha.
Obviously we are aware of food waste, and that is a huge problem. But I think we can only do one thing at a time. But I think if people are cutting down on meat and dairy, then that's a good thing.
Okay. Quick question while we get the mic up there. What's the best way to reintroduce lost microbes back into your microbiome?
Good question. I don't know the answer, actually. Fecal transplants used to be the extreme measure, but they've shown not to be that good unless you've got very severe infections or ulcerative colitis. So it's much easier to get rid of bad microbes through a diet. So good diet will get rid of the bad microbes, the inflammatory ones. It seems to be much harder to build up the good ones. So we're still doing those experiments. We don't know yet.
We've got the Prime Minister at 10 past. Question from there. I'm sorry, this may have to be the last question.
Yeah, thanks, Tim, for the great talk. Federico, postdoc at the Quadrum in gut microbiome research. So the first slide, when you showed the heat map of like the different foods, some are healthy, some are not healthy, how did you determine that score? How did you calculate it?
It was the replies of 13 nutrition professors in the US and the UK. So they basically scored 100 foods from 0 to 10 in healthy or unhealthy. So it's not our data, it was just saying this is the opinion. It was an opinion heat map of 10 professors, 13 professors, to show the difference and where the sweet spot was of where people don't agree. Things like dairy, artificial sweeteners, dried fruits, etc.
Okay, thank you very much. Helen, you can ask your question when you come up. No, you're all right. Thank you very much. I'm aware that we didn't get through all the questions, but thank you for going them through. I found this a really worthwhile exercise. I'd love to spend some more time with you and debate. And I think we need to get debating beyond the pros and cons of what we're talking about and how we actually turn it into something which is useful for commerce, society, and all the other bits. But thank you. It's been really good.
My pleasure.
So last thing for me to do, and you'll be pleased, I'm going to go sit down. I might even go sit at the back so I feel more comfortable. Please come and tell us. Another Tim. It's all confusing. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chris. Can you hear me? Is this one on? Is the one John had? Yes? Yes. Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you, Chris. It's a privilege to be joining IFST, to be joining all of you. And I'd like to start with a thank you to John. I've been working with John for a few weeks now, and how did you put it, John? As your head gets emptier, you're getting a headache. Well, I can tell you that my head's getting fuller, and it's not a headache yet, but I'm really grateful for all that the encyclopedic knowledge you're referring to me. I may be stepping into your shoes, but I don't think I could ever fill them. But please stay in touch, and you'll always be a member of our IFST family. Thank you, Professor Tim, for the talk this evening, all about personalised nutrition. And I thought to myself, this is all about, actually, what does IFST mean to a personal point of view to me? And I thought, what does the I in IFST stand for each of you? That's my one question I'm going to give back to all of you after these questions. What does the I stand for? I am a member. I'm a fellow. I'm a past president. I'm a corporate supporter. I'm a board member. I'm a member of a committee. I think we all have a different connection. My I is I want to find more people like you that want to be part of IFST, to continue your journey with IFST, whatever that may be, and indeed to find more members. So you're going to get to know me as giving short speeches, because they are always the best, and then you'll remember them. So what's your I in IFST? But the final thing to say is we face many challenges in our food world at the moment, from supply, standards, security, substitutes, just to name but a few. IFST is here to support each of you. And what I'd like to say is we can address those issues collectively and based on good science. So there's my first speech, and it's short, and therefore you'll remember it. I'd like to say thank you for the welcome. And John, thank you for all that you have done for IFST. Helen, what's next? So I look forward to working with each of you. Please do get in touch. Thank you.
Oh, they're breakable. Good evening, everyone. So delighted you could join us for the lecture. It's a great venue, and it's been a really interesting topic. And of course, this evening is one of great joy that we're all together, and that we will have some good conversations afterwards, I'm sure. I'd like to thank Brenntag Food and Nutrition for sponsoring the event.
which certainly has made it, will make it a very memorable one from the facilities and that sort of thing. But my job this evening is to acknowledge and thank those who are leaving IFST, and we've just met our new incoming chief executive, and I couldn't be more delighted that Tim has joined us. I know he will have huge enthusiasm and ambition for our institute. Before I move on to say thank you to John, I also wanted to say thank you to Andrew Gardner, who sat down the front here. He will be leaving us from the operations director role over the next few weeks. We'll deal with yours when the time comes, Andrew. I think it's too much to deal with two leaving in one evening. So we will focus on John. I'm sure you're pleased to hear that this is not going to become some kind of "this is your life" tribute to him, with surprise individuals joining us from different parts of the country or the world or whatever. But John has clearly interacted with many, many people over the last 12 years that he's been doing this role. And I mean, I personally remember meeting John for the first time. I had just started at a certain carbonated beverage company that may have appeared in one of the slides earlier. And John came up to me at one of the meetings and introduced himself. And he has always been someone that's very easy to have a conversation with, makes you feel very much at ease. And when you work in big companies, big food companies, often it's those people in marketing and various other things who, you know, have the stage and the limelight at events and what have you. And so John and I would often, after that, find each other in the crowd, because we would be some of the technical food science people, and of course we like to club together and chat about things and let all the marketing people and all those other people have the sort of conversations they have. And of course, many of you will know that John's background is not as a food scientist himself, but I think he demonstrated very effectively, very quickly, how rapidly he could come up to speed with all the topics that he needed to be aware of that were so important to us as food science and technologists. He's also very quietly persuasive, I would say. He mentioned about the food safety fact sheets earlier on, and I wasn't very active with IFST when I first met him, and before I knew where I was on the communications committee, and not long after that I was then the chair of the communications committee. So he's very good at bringing people in and getting them to be active and engage, etc. And I'm sure that's something that Tim will want to do as well. But John has been very effective at that, quietly persuasive, I would say. Clearly, his primary role is leadership and direction for the executive team, but he gets to work with so many people. The trustees, those who are on the board, the members, and external stakeholders, such as many of you who are in the audience this evening. When John said he was leaving and we made the announcement, it was very rapid, the response we had from members saying, "Oh my goodness, we can't believe this has happened." That's how I felt when he told me as well, and we'd have to recruit someone. But the outpouring of gratitude to what John had done was there right from the get-go. And so I think, John, one thing you've already been given, if these things electronically are given, is an electronic card, which, as I was one of the last people to sign it, I've seen quite a high level of creativity, shall we say, in some of the input. But you will get a really nice sense, I think, from that, to the warmth and the gratitude that members, board members, past presidents, you name it, they have all wanted to say thank you very much. Without going into too much detail about what John has given and what he has achieved, I would refer you to the website and the interview that Sterling Crew, our incoming president, has done with John, which I think explains really nicely about what it is he has achieved and what he is so proud of. It tells the story of the last 12 years, I would say. But we couldn't really not take the opportunity of the lecture, and we don't normally do this. We're kind of hijacking the lecture, I suppose, to say thank you to John, because this is an opportunity for lots of you to talk to him and thank him personally, but for us to pass on a couple of thank you gifts to him. So the first one that I have for him is one of the last things that John has actually done, and he's very good at governance and rigour and processes and things, is he'll see where this is going pretty quickly, but we wanted to reinvigorate the Honorary Fellowship Award. And so we now have a new process. We hope that will encourage more members to put their colleagues and their friends and those that they admire forward for honorary fellowship. We have just started that new process, and we'll be giving honorary fellowships around about the time of the AGM. I think it will be next year, but that is now open, so please do that. But in a rather turning the tables exercise on him, the board actually has put forward to the group that assesses honorary fellowships a nomination for John, somewhat out of the normal cycle, and we would be delighted if John would come and accept the award of Honorary Fellowship of IFST. Congratulations. And you might as well stay there, actually, John, because there's a couple of other things in this bag here. So this one's, that's for you to open later. Don't lose it in the bar or anything, because it does have some value. It's kind of customary to have something breakable that is like a bottle or something like that. But we weren't quite sure if red wine was going to come out well in the talk, so we're not doing that. But it's not going to be very visible from the back, but this is a really very heavy and very lovely crystal commemorative thing. I don't quite know what to call it. which says, engraved, John Paul, Chief Executive, 2010 to 2022, with thanks from IFST members, executive and trustees.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
It is heavy.
It's very heavy. Wow, thank you.
So that was all I was intending to say. I don't know, John, if you want to say anything in return.
No, I mean, that's really amazing, and I thank you so much for that. It's really good to know that the process works for the Honorary Fellowship, but no, that is absolutely amazing. It's great to see you all here tonight, and you know, it's the timing of it is just perfect to be able to say goodbye to you in person, and so I thank you. In fact, we had the past president's lunch this afternoon, which finished at about 3 o'clock. And so I had a bit of time to kill between then. I thought what I'm going to do is find a nice sunny bench and sit and do my emails. But I got very distracted because the first email was that thank you card. So it has reached me, and so some amazing messages in that, and I just thank you all for those. 2 thank yous, really. One is, as I mentioned before, which is to all of you, because the Institute is you. I'm just there to sort of be the conductor, and so I thank you all for your contributions. It's been amazing to work with you all. I have a motto that I brought with me to IFST, which is we've got a serious job to do, but we can have fun doing it. And I think we have, so thank you very much for that. And of course, I have to thank the team. If you look at the roll of honour of the team, actually, because of turnover, of course, it isn't just the 12 people that are currently in the team, but all of those that worked at IFST in the past as well. So thanks to them. You can't say posthumously, can you? But you know what I mean. But particularly to the current team. And I know I shouldn't single anyone out particularly, but because it is almost Andrew's finale as well, and because he's been my right-hand man, I'd just like to thank Andrew as well. But thank you to all the team. Thank you all.
Well, there aren't very many of those, as you know. I don't know what the total is, but there aren't many, so you are honoured indeed to have one.
Thank you so much.
And we are honoured to have had you as our Chief Executive. I think that is the completion of the formalities of the evening. So I think we allow the branches to go back to whatever it is they're going to be doing for the rest of the evening, and we can adjourn to the basement. And thank you again for coming, and I look forward to seeing you next time.